This is an opportunity for him to explore some of the possibilities that were hinted at in the Pyongyang declaration.
Put a lot more meat to the very bare bones of the Singapore communique and as well as the inter-Korean summits.
We could seize the opportunity here with U.S. support for an end-of-the-war declaration to get North Korea to decommission.
I don't think we should sign a peace declaration. I think instead we should work towards a peace treaty.
South and North Korea began removing landmines and explosives in the demilitarized zone this week.
I mean, this is a series of confidence-building measures.
We have strong consultation between not only the U.S. and South Korea, but also the United Nations Command.
From the Voice of America, this is Washington Talk.
Hello and welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eun-Jung Cho. Secretary Pompeo is optimistic his fourth trip to Pyongyang will bring progress towards a second summit between President Trump and Chairman Kim, and also build a path to North Korea's denuclearization. What will be the desired outcomes of this latest visit?
We want it fast, but we're not going to play the time game. My comment about 2021 was not mine. President Trump's comments are exactly right. This is a long-term problem.
Now my guest today, Mr. Daryl Kimball, Executive Director of the Arms Control Association. Mr. Kimball focused his research on nuclear arms control for 3 decades. Also joining us, Mr. Bruce Klingner, Senior Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Mr. Klingner spent 20 years in the intelligence community and was CIA's Deputy Division Chief for Korea. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Secretary Pompeo is in Pyongyang for 1 day. Does this mean that much has been coordinated between North Korea and the United States?
Well, I don't think he's going to have very much time in Pyongyang. It's going to be a short trip. Interestingly, the State Department advertised that he will be meeting with Kim Jong-un. I think this is an opportunity for him to explore some of the possibilities that were hinted at in the Pyongyang declaration between North and South about decommissioning the Yongbyon nuclear complex in exchange for corresponding steps. In other words, a possible joint political declaration on the end of the war. So I'm not expecting any grand announcement, but I think this is a chance to explore some of that and also perhaps to discuss when and whether President Trump and Chairman Kim are going to meet again for another summit.
Mm-hmm. Bruce, Daryl just mentioned about exploring Yongbyon in the Pyongyang Declaration. What would be some of the other points that he would check to set the conditions?
I think really overall what we need to do is put a lot more meat to the very bare bones of the Singapore communique and as well as the inter-Korean summits. They've been very long on promises to the North, but very little on the details of North Korean denuclearization. Oftentimes it's just a sentence or a half a sentence at the last paragraph or second to last paragraph with just vague North Korea promises to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. So I think that's where the emphasis has to be, is on really fleshing that out, getting the details, even getting the definitions of denuclearization and the Korean Peninsula. The U.S. and North Korea appear to have very different definitions of those fairly simple, straightforward words.
Mm-hmm. South Korea's Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa proposed that the United States seek the closure of Yongbyon plant first and then delay asking for the nuclear inventory for later. Are you for or against this?
I'm against that. I think it seems to be another case of South Korea watering down requirements for North Korea to take significant steps towards denuclearization as it's required to do under 11 UN Security Council resolutions. So it seems as in the past, whenever we reach some point of intransigence with North Korea, rather than having them take the next step forward, it always turns to the U.S. to take another concession.
Well, I would disagree with Bruce in the sense that if the North Koreans are serious about verifiably decommissioning Yongbyon, which has a 5-megawatt reactor, a plutonium separation plant, uranium enrichment facility, that would be a very important step on the road to complete denuclearization. I mean, we need to get them to stop producing fissile material. They continue to produce fissile material for weapons. That would be a tangible step, and I think Foreign Minister Kang was saying in this Washington Post interview from a couple of days ago that she wants to see and thinks that tangible steps on the road to denuclearization would be a better next step than a declaration from the North Koreans about their program, which is a subject that would inevitably lead to bickering back and forth about how complete it is or it isn't. And as you said, Bruce, I mean, I agree, there is no agreed definition on what the scope and the definition of denuclearization is. So there's a lot of room right now for there to be disagreement between the two sides about that issue. So it might be better, I think, to move on with a tangible, concrete step that reduces, won't eliminate, North Korea's opportunity to further increase its nuclear capabilities.
Mm-hmm. But do we want a selective dismantlement by North Korea or get a complete picture of the whole nuclear facility, Bruce?
I think you can make a very good argument on both sides. I think what we need to do is have a lot of really the grunt work of diplomacy and negotiations. I'm more in favor of the traditional approach where you have diplomats, whether it's the Secretary of State or it's the Special Envoy or others, sort of really working out the details. And then you have the leaders come in, as we did in arms control treaties with the Soviet Union, to resolve when we have a major disagreement, and then things can move forward. But I think having the summit meetings prematurely just leads to the perception or the claims of progress without really having any real progress. So I would be more in favor of President Trump not having a summit in the near term. I think let's have the diplomats do their job first.
What about this premise by South Korea that demanding a declaration list will only lead to argument between United States and North Korea and will lead to breakdown of the talks, like in 2005, the September 19th joint statement of the six-party talks? Do we agree with this?
Well, in the 2005-2007 period, I mean, this was a point of contention. It was one of the reasons why the denuclearization pledge of 2005 was not carried out, because the North Koreans were balking about a declaration. Now, I mean, they will need to provide a full and complete accounting for their nuclear weapons program, the production numbers of fissile material, where the weapons are, where the facilities are. That will have to be backed up with a detailed verification regime. But that is a big ask at this early point in the process, I think, for North Korea. So I would agree at some point we need that to move forward. But you know, we can and should halt their further production of fissile material if we have the chance. And I'm worried that if at this stage Secretary Pompeo doesn't make the kind of progress that we want to see, that we all want to see, this diplomatic opening could break down.
But Bruce, at this point in negotiations, is it beneficial to the United States to have South and North Korea set the terms and conditions and U.S. heeding to this?
Well, I think the U.S. sees the South Korean President Moon Jae-in is going a bit too far and too fast, and is also sort of delegating denuclearization as only a U.S. North Korean issue, whereas South Korea is the one who provides the benefits and the promises of economic largesse. It's an international issue, of course, under the UN resolutions. You know, on a data declaration, it seems like this could be another case of kicking the can down the road. Well, this will be contentious, North Korea won't like it, so let's not ask for it. And that's consistent with things that happened during the negotiations in the six-party talks. You know, some of the ways you prevent some of the discrepancies or the disagreement over the data declarations, you work out ahead of time precisely what should be on the piece of paper, what categories should be included, what terminology is used, what units of measurement, and then after that, then the verification. So as we did in arms control treaties with the Soviets, you know, we defined clearly what a missile was, what a tank was, what an artillery piece was, and in preparation for the data declarations, we even agreed upon the format that the paper would be handed over in so that we could quickly assess it.
North Korea's KCNA said it doesn't want declaration-to-declaration deal anymore. When is the right time for the United States to sign the end-of-war declaration with North Korea?
Well, I don't think we should sign a peace declaration. I think instead we should work towards a peace treaty, as it was one of the working groups of the six-party talks. I see a peace treaty as something that's done at the end of what will likely be lengthy, arduous negotiations about conventional force reductions, similar to the Conventional Armed Forces in Europe treaty, where we cap the two levels of forces and then we define subzones and we try to sort of thin them out along the DMZ so that it reduces the potential for attacks or invasion. So I think a peace declaration is sort of a feel-good initiative. Even the advocates in South Korea will say, it really won't accomplish anything, it's symbolic, so why not sign it? And I turn it around and say, what objective are you trying to achieve? What is the specific quid pro quo you'll get from North Korea? Or if North Korea just feels less threatened, although they are the ones that have repeatedly attacked us, then what is it they will do differently? And the advocates can't provide any real answers.
Well, I think the real answer is that we could seize the opportunity here with a U.S. support for an end-of-the-war declaration to get North Korea to decommission or to begin to decommission Yongbyon. That would be a real tangible outcome. I think it would be a very good trade, a joint declaration on the end of the war. It's not a peace treaty, I agree, and that is the end goal that could and should come with full and complete denuclearization, but we're years away from a peace treaty or full and complete denuclearization. And I think there's a strong argument to be made that if this process is going to move forward, it needs some momentum. Nothing has happened, nothing tangible since Singapore. So this would be a concrete step, and Mike Pompeo can, on this trip, I think, explore that possibility to determine whether it's worth it and if it's a good deal. And I think it is certainly something worth exploring and pursuing.
On that point, Bruce, my last question. How should the second summit between President Trump and Chairman Kim differ from the Singapore summit?
Details. We really need tangible details. One of the problems I think we've had is we hear President Trump, President Moon, and Secretary Pompeo all claiming things that Kim Jong-un has agreed to. We haven't heard it from North Korea. Instead, we usually hear rejections of the U.S. proposals, and we haven't seen it in writing. So, there are a lot of promises that what North Korea is supposedly agreeing to. We need to get it in writing. We need to get it in great detail. I'm not in favor of a peace declaration, but if we go down that path, we have to specify what do we get in return. If they're going to take Yongbyon offline or deactivate it, what does that mean? How is it verified, et cetera.
We'll end our conversation here and watch video for our next discussion.
Okay.
South and North Korea began removing landmines and explosives in the demilitarized zone this week. This is part of a broader effort by the two Koreas to ease military tensions. Now, some say it will take 200 years to remove all the mines from the demilitarized zone. So what are some of the technical difficulties?
There are a lot of mines on the DMZ. It would take many, many years for there to be a complete demilitarization of the anti-personnel mines. I think the steps that the North and South have agreed to begin are largely symbolic. This does not appear to be, to me, an effort to completely clear the mines from the DMZ. So I think in the sense that this is a confidence-building measure, it's useful, but we have to recognize that the DMZ is still a no-man's land that's highly militarized and a buffer zone between the North and the South.
Clearing mines is an important work. There is a global campaign for this, but this must be a dilemma because wouldn't South Korea be vulnerable to North Korean assaults and attacks over land because of this?
Well, the mines are there for a reason. The North Korean invasion, North Korean incursions, various North Korean attacks and acts of terror and acts of war over the decades. So the U.S. and its allies are concerned about North Korean activity. So this year we've had a few months of diplomatic breakthroughs or seeming breakthroughs. But the situation on the ground hasn't changed from the North Korean nuclear, missile, and conventional threat. So many of us have advocated for confidence-building measures over the years, but I think a lot of it is how you do it. So, we need to make sure we have strong consultation between not only the U.S. and South Korea, but also the United Nations Command. And, in my travels and meetings, I'm getting a different sense of what South Korea says is happening from what others are saying is happening. And it's sort of taking on a tale of two cities, where some are saying, things are well coordinated, others are saying it's not nearly that well done.
Other than the consultation part, are there some of the elements that could raise concerns for the United States? Daryl?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, I think there may have been some frustration on the part of the U.S. military command about the lack of coordination about some of those details, but I don't think there's anything in there that diminishes the United States and South Korean forces from being able to defend South Korea from North Korean provocations or aggression. But at later stages, there are some things that are going to impinge upon defensive capabilities. In the long run, I think what we're going to have to be aiming for, if there is a peace treaty, is joint demilitarization along the DMZ. That will require more detailed verification. But I think at this stage, these are confidence-building steps that do decrease the chance of miscalculation and war. And in that sense, I think it increases the security of South Korea. But we're in an early phase here, and the real work lays ahead, and it's going to be a very difficult process.
Bruce, what are U.S. concerns?
Well, I think the U.S. concerns, beyond being consulted and having its guidance incorporated, things like the Northern Limit Line, which the UN command, drew. If the Koreas are defining, a new peace zone which erases that, then does that make the United Nations Command, which is responsible for maintaining the armistices, their job much more difficult? So, as we move forward, we need, again, details, clearly identifying what steps North Korea has to do. And if we're just demilitarizing the point of contact, that can lead to a decrease in accidental skirmishes. But again, we need to see what actions are being taken to remove or reduce the North Korean conventional force threat.
Bill, you're an arms control expert. The inter-Korean military agreement doesn't have any verification measures. So could this lead to successful implementation without verification measures?
Well, I would say this is not an arms control agreement per se. I mean, this is a series of confidence-building measures, each of which is observable. We can see whether the North does what it is supposed to do, whether the South does what it's supposed to do. What is not clear is if there is a dispute, how do you resolve the dispute? I assume that it will be further consultations between the North and the South. But as Bruce said, as we get to the next phases in this process, there's going to have to be a detailed verification regime that's put in place, including observations by independent teams that make sure that each side is reducing the conventional and unconventional forces on each side of the DMZ. But that's for a later stage, if and when the denuclearization process moves forward.
We'll leave it here and move on to our next segment. Now time for the photo moment, time to look at an interesting North Korea picture. Today we have a cartoon from the New York Times this week. The title is Trump Targets Tehran. The New York Times says President Trump raged at Iran for much of his address at the United Nations while he praised Kim Jong-un. Bruce, what's your reaction?
Well, I think it does reflect, President Trump has been very critical of the Iran nuclear deal, as well as all previous agreements with North Korea. I think we're all struck by the change in the president's tone in the two General Assembly speeches from last year and this year. I thought the fire and fury was a bit extreme on one end, and I think now the claiming success is too extreme on the other end.
What this cartoon is pointing out is, the real threat here to international security right now is North Korea. That's where President Trump needs to focus more attention. And I agree with Bruce that, I mean, this is the time to get down to details to make sure that North Korea is actually following through on the vague commitments it made.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Bruce and Daryl, thank you for your time and great discussion.
Good. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. And this was Washington Talk from the Voice of America, and I'm Eun Jung Cho. Join us next week for more analysis on North Korea.